my team works on directly, and then ones where we have joint initiatives with other groups. So I'm going to go through those with you today. Come on. Okay, so as Karina said, just a little bit of history. Why am I involved in international? I'm very passionate about it. Everything I do or see really is with a filter and a lens of international. For my life, I was born and raised in Japan. There's a picture of my brother and I in a little village. We grew up on the side of Mount Fuji. And came to the States for college, and so am fluent both culturally and language-wise. And that really, although early on I was an elementary school teacher and I have my master's in that side of the world, I ended up entering software in the mid-90s, so fairly early in the industry overall, and was able to really build my career off of that, primarily using my language to start with. So if we look at Adobe, you're all familiar with it. We're one of the largest software companies. Of software companies, we probably have the most broad offerings in terms of categories. So we do digital imaging, like with Photoshop and the number of products in there, and digital video and layout and Business Acrobat. And so when you look at the disparate number of products that we have, there's just a huge amount of work that has to be done. We are celebrating our 40th anniversary. I think it was actually a couple days ago. So we've been around a long time, and almost from year one, John and Chuck, the founders, had started working primarily with Japan and Germany in starting to try to do localization or offering products of our early products there. But when you think about that breadth of our products, and we started obviously with professional products, and now the world is changing significantly. We have mobile apps, we have a number of things. The value of that and what is perceived as value by customers is very, very important, and that has changed over time. So that's really where the challenge is that it used to be that you would deliver a box product where you were localizing, the UI of the product and then handing it off to valued added resellers that would do work in the countries. And now what we're finding is that companies actually have to have delightful experiences, right digitally available through the cloud to people. It's not enough to build a tool. You actually have to build an ecosystem around it. So what does that look like? So I started a team quite a few years ago. It's morphed over time, but we are international strategy and product management, ISPM. And we really look at, how do we work across all these teams? So I built sort of a wheel to talk about all of the things that my team does. We are not a large team. We are about 25 right now, working across all of these things. So primarily we're doing strategic and foundational work to try to address and train all the product teams on what to do, because we can't possibly go in and one-to-one work on individual products and teams anymore. But we do consulting across our group, and we do some deep dives if we have a very key product and critical initiatives. And then we really, as I said, concentrate on doing foundational things. So I know there's over the years when we had the Creative Suite and the boxes and then moved into the cloud space about 2013, 14. We only had 39 sort of desktop products, services, and SDKs and things around that. If you look at the last 9 years, now going into 10 years, look at the number, the exponential growth of products and things and services and backend systems that we, tools and things we build to support. We do count things like Android and iOS as different because we have different engineering teams working on those. So, even for like a product like Photoshop, you're going to have desktop. You have the spinoff of Lightroom with their mobile products and their, browser product, and then their desktop products. So we kind of go through, and some products have 5 or 6 surfaces or variations on that. But when you look at the number there, you think about, my team had to figure out, what do we do with this many products, this many teams at Adobe? We now have 26,000 people. I'm, 2,503 is my number from when I started at Adobe. We have grown so big. And when we bring companies in, I'm part of the M&A group as well. How do you train these people? How do you talk to them about what we need to do to be internationally ready? So that challenge was something that several years ago, we really started to sit down and say, how can we get the knowledge out to people in the right way? We can't possibly, there's not enough hours in the day to meet with every team and really explain to them what they need to do. So we started building these initiatives. So the first one is really the core of what we do, and that's I-47N. And those of you that have been sort of in the localization or globalization world will recognize sort of that L10N, you know, type thing that we have. But we took internationalization, localization, and culturalization as three very distinct pillars, and then kind of built that out and said there are 47 letters. It's I-47N. Everybody needs to deal with this. So with every single product, it doesn't matter whether it's a tool, backend, whether it has UI or not, we walk through this process with them, and they are required to have to be assessed. The globalization engineering and localization team does not fall under me. They are adjacent to me, and we partner together. And the globalization engineering team is responsible for assessing the source code of everything. And they go through and look at this, and they do a grade on the internationalization. We have an entire set of tools and training and ways for them to look at this and to help product teams. But essentially where we've landed is that a product is not allowed to go out the door publicly, even if that's a small alpha or beta, without being internationalized. And, you know, from that, we mean that it's code ready or world ready. We don't have to have it localized, but it has to be ready for that. There are some instances in which we can't do that if there are acquisitions and other things that are big and it takes time, and we're trying to do that. But that is our, you know, our primary core on that. And if they don't have it internationalized, then the engineering team will come in and work with them to make sure that that happens. The second area is localization for Adobe. And I know, you know, in the industry, a lot of people have different definitions of everything. So at Adobe, we talk about localization as actually just being the translation of strings in the product. And the help the help manuals are sort of online help that goes with that. Because that was how it sort of evolved over the years, and it was very hard to break people's definition of that. But localization for us is a business decision for the most part. So if something is internationalized, somebody, you know, living in Dubai could be on an English OS and type in Arabic, and that will work. But the UI would not be there for them. When it comes to localization, we would then add the UI on. So that's something we work with on the teams, and we do have another initiative underway that I'll talk about. And then culturalization really is, how do I make that fit the absolute best to really, I don't remember if it was Peter that was just on there that, or the one before that, but talked about the customer, right? This is about the customer. How do they emotionally identify with what you offer them, and how can we do that better? So that's the first thing that we started working on. Secondly, we took that concept and then said, how can we scale that to 26,000 people, or to the people that are necessary for this? So when we looked at the decision makers at Adobe and the people that were writing the code and the core, it really came down to engineering, product management, program management, and product marketing were the core people that had to understand these concepts. So for us in the digital media business unit, that ended up being really, actually, out of the whole company, it ended up being about a fifth of the company, but out of the digital media side, it was almost a third that had to take this. And we got permission. I took it all the way up to Shantanu and got permission to do required training that meant that if they didn't do it, their VPs and senior VPs would get emails constantly that so-and-so did not do the training, so that they can get dinged for that. And we built a number of modules that we deemed were most important, that went from a core overview into an engineering special one. You know, we kind of went through, and then for some countries like Japan that are very specific and have culturalization needs, we built modules around that. The one, you know, difficulty on this was that we had to write everything. So it took about a year, but we did that to help. Then we have a way of looking at how we work with teams. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier with the wheel, but we can't meet with everybody. So when the company comes back and says this year or for the next few years, we're focusing on this product, we often then go to that product team and say, look, we can try to deep dive with you for certain places or certain countries where you have the most needs. Other than that, we do consulting help. And then outside of that, we really have to say, hopefully, that the training will give them what they need to do what they have to do. The second area that was really big was getting ourselves inserted into the service lifecycle. So every single product at Adobe goes through multiple presentations and approvals with leadership, and before they can get invested and move on and do the next version of whatever product it is. And so there is a process and a team called the SLC team that goes through that. And at the very beginning, international was not on there. And we found that product teams were skipping or missing things about what they were doing for international. So we worked with them. We have our own slides they have to fill out. They have to be assessed both by our team and the globalization team. And we have approval or not approval before they go to a meeting with the leadership team that says whether they've passed or not. And if not, they have to come back and work with us to make sure we have that covered. Another thing that I do with my team is that all the way down from my level through my managers down to the very bottom, we have everybody come up with their sphere of influence. And this is my team very specifically, but because we have no engineering ourselves, we are only as successful as our ability to influence across the company. And if you don't know who you need to influence, you cannot do your job. And so, and we're very particular about the people that we hire that really have to be able to be good with EQ, emotional, as well as IQ. So here's an example of one of the guys on our team. He works with the document cloud, so the Acrobat side of the world. And this was an example from last year of his sphere of influence and all of the people that he has to meet with regularly in order to influence them. So for example, in the case of Acrobat, a lot of the money that was available for various things happened to be in the marketing team. So this sort of DC product marketing at the bottom. And the VP really kind of owns the purse strings there. Where are we going to put all this stuff around the world? So, you know, Nara had to start at the bottom, make a relationship with a product marketing manager, with the BizStrat people, with everybody all the way up in order to get the teams to listen to them about what they needed to do. And we found that this really makes a difference in who are you meeting with below you, peer to you, above you, and what kind of influence are you doing and how many times are you meeting with them a year as we go look at our KPIs. Finally, this last year was the first year that I was able to start a business team within my team. So it's called the International Business Global Expansion and Growth Team. And the reason why I felt like we needed this was, again, we're an influence team. So we didn't have our own engineers. We neither had our own finance people. And so in order to get things done, we would, you know, beg people to give us part of their time. And people at Adobe are actually pretty great about doing that. But at the same time, they had their own job as well. We also noticed that, you know, all the different teams had varying levels of what they looked at internationally. And then the biggest problem is that, you know, I've talked before in some of the discussions I've had that big companies tend to be siloed. And so when every group would present to the ops staff, they would present from their perspective. So go-to-market would present from their perspective, and this product would present from their perspective. And so you were getting a slice of the truth, but, you know, not a holistic picture. So my goal was to start a team within my group that also had data analysts on this. And their job is to pull in all of the information from the siloed teams in the company, as well as looking at external sources like App Annie, et cetera, and then pulling together a quarter over quarter sort of overall global snapshot of global expansion and really where we need to go. And then we deep dive also every quarter on one product that's a critical product for Adobe and come up with hypotheses that we then share with the product team because often they don't go that deep, and then also with leadership. So this is something we've just started and we're really excited about that. So cross-team initiatives. So this is one of the biggest ones where, you know, when we started looking at offering more of our products on more surfaces, and you think about there's, you know, browser, there's desktop, there's iPad, there's iPhone, and then there's ones that are used in education as well. I started looking at the fact that Adobe comes from a history where product teams got to make their own decision of where they wanted to localize. And in a lot of ways, that's still true, much to my chagrin. I would like to run the world and tell Adobe what they have to do, but we haven't gotten that sort of mandate down from the top. So when a customer comes into our Creative Cloud and owns a subscription, which they can use on any surface, if you are in a language that is not one of the top priority languages, you could run into the situation where across services with the same product, you're not going to have localization. Or if you want to go from one product to another, you'll go from your language to English, for example. And I wanted to get rid of that and have a seamless way for customers to move across surfaces and product in their language without that being a disruption. So we did a huge research, did a lot of things, presented across the company all the way to the top, got a lot of traction around this. And one of the things, we called it the Global 34, the G34, but we use Common Sense Advisory. If you're familiar with them, they're sort of an international and localization think tank. And one of their researches really hit home where they looked at FY22 to 27 and said, look, when we look at the eGDP or the digital buying power out there, if you look at the left-hand side, that's where sort of the blue are the top languages, and they make up, those 16 make up 90% of the world's eGDP. And this is at large, not just technology. And if you pull out tier 2, which is the green, and those languages, they make up another 7%. So if you cover those 34 languages, you could be covering the opportunity of 97% of the world's buying power and availability. So we took that as our sort of base, and we built an initiative called G34, where we are now working to try to get all of our products on the DME side over the next few years onto these 34 languages. And they just released their new one, I think, that went out to 31. And so we're looking at that too, because a lot of the language in Southeast Asia and Africa are starting to, move up as well. But that's one that we're working very hard now, going across those 229 plus products and trying to build a schedule to get them on that. We also partner very closely with our go-to-market folks. I've deleted almost everything to protect Adobe information, so I'm just going to give you the framework here. But they built a model called GEM, the Global Expansion Model, where we looked at what does readiness look like worldwide when it comes to marketing and sales in all the countries in the world. And then let's look at opportunity across that as well. So all the blue dots represent countries for us, and where those opportunity is, looking at TAM and TPM and ARR and MAU and everything that you have out there. You can see that the US I left up as
global QMS audits, and
what?
We're getting audited now, and they don't understand the SAFe methodology.
I'm sorry.
Sorry,
Oh.
Priscilla, I think someone forgot to mute their mic.
So we look at all of the countries in this market maturity stage, and if you are an optimized country, that's where we've been for a long time. We have all of our sales and marketing people, but we really need to double down to continue to optimize the biggest amount of revenue and opportunity. Scale are the ones, all of these are like over the next 2 to 3 years to 5 years. Scale are the ones where we've started to go in, we start to have things, but we really want to move forward into that. And then build are the longer term ones. So our team looks at like G34, we look at where all the languages and the products are, we look at opportunity, and then we try to help make sure that our products are aligned, so that when the sales and marketing people are out around the world, that they have the product that they need to reach the numbers that they need to meet. And finally, this is a plan that's under consideration. Oops, we're not doing it yet, but we want to look at it this year. Most, companies, I think, that have been around as long as us, started with a very traditional localization process. You would extract strings, you would have a vendor, you would send them off. There's tools, SDL, Lionbridge would do this, and you'd use Trados or whatever, and it would come back and you'd get your product. And that worked for a number of years, especially when we were doing a tool where we were handing something to them. But what we found is that in sort of the new world where things are going, where it's a lot more interactive, there's templates, there is, change every week, every day, and trendy words like, do you ever feel old? Like, I'm honestly, right? If your finger's not on the pulse of what's going on, you might not be using the right word that people are using today for these tools. So what we found is that this wasn't working as well as we wanted for the quality of localization. So my partners, in the globalization, engineering, and localization side, we have a team here and a team in India that we've been working with together a lot. And so we've been partnering to look at, are there ways that we can go in for product teams and do levels of localization offerings where at the very bottom, machine translation has gotten much, much better. being from Japan and being that it's usually so bad for Japan, I'm a little bit biased that maybe it's not as great, but I think in general, for a lot of languages, it does work fairly well and they're getting better. So, could we get to the point where we could say, look, if product X wants to do 100 languages, even if the ARR isn't there, the MAU or the monthly active use could go up with that and possibly be a future customer. In that case, would we be willing to say for languages, 60 through 100, we would do raw machine translation. It's the cheapest thing for the product team. And then I've also built with teams gating factors where, we put out the lowest level of what would be good for a customer. And then as we see MAU go up or ARR go up, then we would move and add more things for them and, add more things so that they could continue to get things in there. So this is something we're looking at. Maybe even building a tool where we would allow people to go in. I said to the guys when I was in India a couple weeks ago, how when you're looking at retirement, they have all these tools online and you get to fill in all your information and it pops out the information on the side, but you can continue to tweak, anything you have on this side to give you different numbers. If we could come to product teams and say, look, you're going out with your next version. Obviously, these countries are the most important to you. For those, do you want to do culturalization primarily, which is at the top, or do a visual type thing for the vendors to visually be able to translate instead of by strings, but for other ones go down and they could actually see how much, they're going to charge in COGS, et cetera. So I'm pretty excited about this, looking at something we're going for in the future. But that is it.
Wow, that's amazing and super interesting, Priscilla. Thank you so much. I'm going to kick off with the Q&A and then I'll let Bryan chime in. I wanted to ask you
Michelle?
kind of
I'll just introduce you to those who don't know you very quickly.
Oh, sure.
My wonderful colleagues, or if let's see if we'll unshare.
And should I stop? Yeah, I should stop sharing. Okay, you can.
There, so everybody can meet you in person. There we go. Just for those who joined us late, these are informal exchanges. We like to make them highly interactive, and we'll now be facilitating. So facilitating an exchange after Priscilla Knoble's presentation. And so I'd like to introduce Michelle Messina, who is a true globetrotter, and I think she's visited 65 countries and counting. She beat me, but she's had a fascinating career in entrepreneurship, in launching new initiatives around the world, and really inspiring entrepreneurship and that in spirit in emerging markets around the world, and also written or authored the book Decoding Silicon Valley. And she's a global entrepreneurship and innovation thought leader here at Global Minds Network. And then I'd like to introduce my colleague, Bryan Semkuley, who is a global innovation and marketing thought leader with us. And Bryan has had an impressive career in corporate, having led global innovation teams and served in VP roles at both InBev as well as Kimberly-Clark. And now also influencing, looking at startups, how to position, how to create value in entering markets. So he's going to, you'll hear from two great perspectives, and in order to optimize this fascinating case that Priscilla has shared with us.
So Priscilla, thanks for the content and the sort of insight into what you're doing. I wanted to ask a couple of questions associated kind of around the culture, the feel of Adobe. The first one is around how much do you think the tools and resources and modeling that you use are reflective of Adobe's culture? And then the second part of the question would be around, do you think that since Adobe has grown through strategic acquisitions over the last 4 decades, do you think that for companies that develop products in-house, that their thought process might be different than a company who grows through strategic acquisition. So a little bit of two-part, how much was created based on, sort of the Adobe culture and the need to localize, culturize, et cetera. And the second part related to the difference of growing a company through acquired products versus developed in-house.
Yeah. So I think as a culture, Adobe is a culture of I just had it at the top of my head and now it's not on the tip of my tongue. Everybody has to agree, so you're always going consensus. Thank you. It's a consensus driven company. So, you're going from team to team to team to team. I think I did probably 30 or 40 presentations on G34, all the way up to the tops, senior VP, EVPs of various groups in order to get sort of buy-in, if you can even believe it. It is a little bit nuts. And so, that sphere of influence really comes in there. So I do think that because we are so vast and people do tend to work in silos, even in product teams, it really was important. And what you see culturally coming out of it really has been from our team driving a lot of this for the, especially for the past 10 years, really making a point that they have to be thinking internationally. And one of the reasons I think, it's good and bad, we've done well, I think Acrobat or PDF or our technology is on 99% of computers, if you think about fonts and everything that is out there. And we've always just done well. Which sometimes is even shocking to ourselves. And so people don't always see the need to do international because they're like, people will buy it anyway. So I think there's a little bit there in that culture too that I struggle with, really trying to push the envelope on where we need to go and what we need to do. How deep do we need to culturalize to make it, delightful for customers? As far as your second question, which was
related to companies that have scaled through acquisition versus developed in-house.
Yeah. So, I think, I don't want to say it doesn't make a difference, but I want to say it's interesting. So I am part of the M&A sort of, thing once it comes into the company, like how do we get them onto this path of I-47N and moving? And if a company, for the most part, if a company has been created in the US, and it was a startup, we find that very rarely do the engineers know anything about internationalization engineering. So their source code, often they hard code in things, they don't externalize strings, and they don't understand that they had to code in a certain way. So those are the ones that we have the hardest time with, and Office takes us the longest time, sometimes several years, to get them onto a roadmap where they can do this. If it is a company from somewhere outside in the rest of world that we acquire, they are often better because they know that the English speaking world tends to be a big revenue driver. So often they are better at doing some level of internationalization, although we still find that they're fairly narrow because often they're from a startup and they didn't do all of that. Internally, if I've been around 25 years at Adobe, I've worked with a lot of people. I found that when there are breakoffs of people that have worked with us in the past, they start right from the beginning, and on their first version, they're out in 20 languages. However, there are teams that build and they think they're snowflakes or they're special, and they build their own thing, and they're like a startup inside the company, and they don't have to do all the things that other product teams do. They often do not do the right thing internationally. So, it's a real mixed bag out there.
That's interesting. Fascinating. Brian,
Yes,
over to you.
Yeah, no, very much so. Thank you very much for joining us today. Appreciate what you've been able to take us through. And, having been in your shoes, directing and driving global initiatives, what have you found are some of the best strategies or techniques to ensure the coordination of execution resources versus the competition for those resources internally?
Oh, it's impossible, isn't it? I think everybody in international feels like they're the ones that are always getting the drags at the bottom. I think we have a regular annual planning cycle. We know when people have to get their stuff on board into product teams to get part of that planning cycle to even be considered. So it is a nonstop coordinated effort. You better be very organized and know who you need to talk to in order to get that investment there. And then, coordinate across all the teams. My one team that is working on the G34 they presented yesterday, in 43 days, they met with 42 teams and kept an internal organization list of who's meeting with who and what's available across all of the things, that those people would need in order to go out the door. It is very difficult. And you're constantly having to prove why, what you do is going to help the company and bring in more revenue if they would invest in this.
Right. No, I completely agree with you. And I think importantly, the documentation of all those conversations is so important to have in a central repository for someone or the entire team to be able to access. So a quick follow-up to that then would be, when I was leading global innovation teams at both Anheuser-Busch InBev and Kimberly-Clark, coordinating with the go-to-market teams was really key to in-market success. So, how soon do you begin to engage your go-to-market teams in the execution process to ensure alignment and, the optimization of the in-market rollout?
Yeah, I think honestly, it's never ending. And I'm a big relationship person. I think if you have a relationship with somebody, if you've met them in person, so I used to travel 200,000 miles a year, pre-pandemic, but I know most of these people and I've known them for years. We tend to hold on to people at Adobe. We have regular conversations and regular meetings set up, even if there's nothing on the calendar that says you have to hit a date, because we always want to know. So this morning, for example, Adobe.com person reached out and I had said, please let me know what your plans are going into FY23. So she sent me a list of here's the new languages, here's what we're planning to do. And then I sent that out to a number of people on my team that then will start going through and working with them as a regular checklist in their meetings. So I think it's a nonstop, almost exhausting, but nonstop across all these teams. And that's where that sphere of influence really helps us. Our KPIs and our OKRs, have we met with them? Have we done this? Have we talked to who we need to talk to? But really an ongoing thing.
That's great. That's great. Well, let me pass it back to Karina, because I know we want to open it up to our attendees as well for questions.
Great. So the floor is open. I'm sure there must be questions out there for you. Leave it to you, to the audience. Otherwise, I know Michelle and Bryan will jump in.
Okay, I'll go first. So hi, everybody. Mendel here again. So very, very interesting talk. Thanks so much for going into so much detail. So I guess my question kind of touches on what Michelle and Bryan were already sort of talking about. And it relates more to the product innovation process. So not the execution itself, but what have been like some of the most happy accidents or interesting experiments which have risen from the localization, internationalization process to sort of influence any new features, or have there ever been like any reverse effects beyond like the cultural and the product mindset or product thinking? Are there any interesting stories that you could tell us?
I do think, so on the product innovation, a lot of the, innovation of what happens comes from the product team, very specific within that area, but there are happy accidents that happen. One of the things we are working on is when we had all of our desktop products and everybody, before we even had the Creative Suite and then Creative Cloud, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, we were all our own product teams. And so everybody had their own text engine. So, at one point a few years ago, and then very specifically last year, as I was looking at the Surface problem for G34, I realized we had 26 text engines at Adobe. And so all of a sudden, if you're saying to a customer that you could take a file, because everybody wants to be able to save files in the cloud, and then you use them in multiple areas or across products. And if you have different text engines with different algorithms of how it lays out text in different languages, you are going to get different results every time. And if you are a typography expert, that is, the worst thing that could ever happen. very different than I'm just entering, a character on a phone and I don't know anything about typography. So we started a whole journey, kind of like the G34 thing, but around text engines internally. And this is a very long process that we're working on with all the teams to try to get to a text engine that would handle everything with all languages and, varying degrees of typography out of the box, working great versus the people that need to do all of the, moving every single thing. And out of that has come a number of features that initially might have been because of Japanese needed it or because of another language needed it, that has resulted in, Western users using Latin fonts going, oh my gosh, that's a great, that's a great feature, a great thing that's going to happen. So we do see where there are times that the need for complex scripts and things that come in actually help drive really interesting things that the rest of the world can use. And that's true across other areas as well, but that was just an example.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Yes, I have a question and more so a comment. Priscilla, it's Bob Mokler here. With regard to how you built your ISP and teams, and quite a lot of moving pieces with that number of bodies, let alone the number of offices you may have had to deal with. But I loved your commentary on the EQ and the IQ of your team members. Over time, as their leader and the departmental group or the team leader, did you ever assign a value of what it meant to have that consistent equity and knowledge and attitude towards the integration, the forward moving of projects? Because time is money and money is time, and people are extremely valuable. So was the retention levels extremely good or better, benchmark better than the rest of the company because of the group that you hired and why you hired them and kept them and paid them appropriately? It's because talent in the IT field moves around very, very rapidly. Forget the acquisitions, just the age of the individuals and a chance to live in a different country and a culture. So did you ever benchmark that or put a dollar value to it?
I have not put a dollar value to it, but I will say that Adobe as a company, I forget what, it's something like 30 or 40%, at least it was when it was around 20,000, are boomerangs, meaning they left Adobe and came back, right? And sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 times. So we have high retention in the company in general, because I do think our company culture is very good in general. What I chose to do, I'm a little bit of a dinosaur. And so, I wanted people that understood product management and understood Adobe to lead my management bench. So I actually hired my management bench of people that I'd worked with for 20 years that knew Adobe. Therefore, one level down, we were all aligned at the top managing the team, and they started to hire people under them. But we all had a very aligned vision on what skill sets, soft and hard, you needed to have. Hard skill sets, we felt like people could often learn, be trained into. Soft skill sets were harder. And so we're very careful about who we hire. We have a program at Adobe where you can careful about what are the skill sets, but we have a checklist that my managers have. We share it with the team. Every year we have an offsite, and my managers primarily run workshops on what it means to work across teams. What are the things you have to do? How do you execute? How do you document? And then we ask every manager to go through that list of hard and soft skills and say, as a PM in this team, you should be able to XYZ. Then we have online Excel sheets that we track that with, especially for promotions. It's a very big issue. And then we have Adobe capabilities too. How do you work? We want you to have integrity. We want you to, and you have to prove that you've done those things as you work, as well as the hard and soft skills. So while we don't have a number value there, I think we try to pay very fairly. We have really good compensation across board. And at the end of the day, I like managing, and so I like my team, and I'm really careful that my team has a good time, that they balance personal and work. And so we tend to keep people on my team for a pretty long time if they can execute those things.
Has that mindset transpired to other managers on your level across the piece to say, retention's not a bad thing?
Yeah, no, I think it is. We have a director, senior director, and above sort of group around product managers, and we talk about a number of things. And what are we doing? Are there things that are similar or not? And so I've shared my big checklist as well of things that you should be able to do. But we talk about things. We get together once a month and really try to make sure that other teams are, also having a similar level of sort of requirements and managing ability.
So there is an opportunity to share best practices and living examples from within.
Absolutely.
Perfect. No. I've seen the ugly other side of that when new owners come in and just try to throw everything out. So and now 12, 14 years later, it's coming back full circle, where how we built the business originally. It's an interesting journey, and it's a good Shakespeare story. So, but not today.
Priscilla, could you share a little bit about how the pandemic affected your process, your communications? Obviously, you weren't traveling. How did you, what's different and what's better or worse now post-pandemic?
Yeah. So, interestingly, my team, because we're international and like a lot of people, you're on calls early in the morning and late at night. I personally stopped going into the office because I didn't have anybody in Seattle anymore. Most of them were in the Bay Area about, 10, 15 years ago. So for me, and then my team came on, and we have two headquarters in California. Well, we have San Jose, which is the main one, but San Francisco, when we did the Macromedia acquisition, became another one. That's an hour back and forth. So people are always commuting, and you're never quite sure what office they're in anyway. So when the video technology, came out, we were told, hey, try to eat your own dog food, because we used to have our own version of it. But my team we've often been on video. And then, of course, we work regionally around the world. I do make a point to try to travel. As I said, my team tries to travel, but once you know people personally, then it's easy to get on video. So we're on video with people all the time. So the pandemic happened, and my team was like, business as usual, right? This really hasn't changed a whole lot. And a lot of us knew each other, although I will say the one interesting thing is most like probably other companies, headcount comes up and then it gets taken away like at random times. So I tell my managers always, if we're even asking for anybody, you need to be doing all this pre-work to have people on your list that you are ready to go. And the minute that headcount opens, and I bug finance like every other day, is it open? Is it open? When it is, I'm like, let's get it locked down. So the year of the pandemic in 2020, our fiscal year starts in December. We had asked for people from October, knowing this was going into the different asks. My managers were ready, and we hired 8 people before March. Our last person, I found out that, and the process, just getting the security thing through was like several weeks, but I had them on it. I bugged them every week, like, where are you at? And the last day where I heard through the grapevine that they were shutting down contractor recs as well, I called them and they got it in by 9 p.m. that night before it got shut down. So we had hired everybody but one, and almost every other team weren't able to hire anybody because they were not ready. But that meant that a third of my team at the time were new. What do? They can't meet with people. So, we had to really build out a relationship building. We did team things. We did happy hours. We had games. We had online parties. I would send boxes of stuff. We would do cooking together in the kitchen, and everybody was showing their kitchen. Like, we were doing everything we could. But I will admit that we did have, a couple of the new hires were in there. One was not, but one was a new hire from the college age. And if you were with Adobe for a long time and you knew people, no problem, because you knew how to navigate and you knew people. If you were new to Adobe, but you had experience in your role, it was easier, especially if they were willing to reach out. But the brand new ones to business, I saw a 50% drop in capabilities over the 2 years, just impossible. And I don't want to say anything negative about young people necessarily, but they thought they were rock stars. And I'm like, dude, you're not, because they don't know what they don't know. And, I said, babies when they're around their family, they model, they learn how to speak, they're looking at people, they're ingesting information. Humans are like that too in a new role, right? You see what other people are doing, you talk to people, you're in meetings with them, you understand how you need to work. And that was hard. So Adobe went back to officially, 2 to 3 days in, 2 to 3 days at home now is the new policy. And my team almost always gets together and they do lunch and they're in 3 to 4 days a week, which I really love.
Thank you, Priscilla, for all your great insights and a very inspirational talk. We are at the last 5 minutes, so I like to use those as takeaways because we have so much expertise in the room, international expertise. So we'd like to hear from you. If you haven't had a chance to ask a question, or if you think there's something else that should be mentioned that's important for global readiness or execution readiness, we'll take a quick tour around the room. So let us know, just idea, thought. We'll go quickly around the room for those who maybe haven't asked questions. Or Curtis, I'll go to you first.
We can go past me. I monopolized an hour of Priscilla's time yesterday, so I don't want to hog this meeting as well.
All right, so we will go to, let's see, Troy Malone, are you there?
I am. This has been great. Thanks, Priscilla. I came in about halfway through because I had another meeting, so I didn't catch everything, but it's always great. I've always done smaller startups compared to an Adobe, but it's always fun for me to learn from people like you that are doing things at such a huge scale as it relates to employees, customers, new markets, et cetera. And I think the one takeaway for me is when you have a product that's so ubiquitous and successful, kind of fighting against that conclusion that, hey, it's going to sell anyway, why bother? You know what I mean? That was kind of interesting to me, and someone in your position or our position have to communicate why it makes sense and why it makes sense for the longer term and the longer term growth of the company, right? So that, I would say, was the biggest takeaway that I pulled out of it.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Peter, any takeaway for us?
Yeah, thanks. Not a takeaway, but a question, Priscilla. Thank you very much excuse me, for your interesting talk. One of your early slides included the process, internationalization, localization, culturalization. Didn't have quite time to get a grasp on that last process, but I do remember that you used the word aesthetic in the description. Could you elaborate a little bit on what you meant by this use of this word under the title culturalization?
Yeah, and we were trying to find a word that really spoke to a locale, and so like if you think about Canada, French Canada, French France, French Caribbean, French Africa have very different cultures around, even though they have one language. So when we think about a product and what might be offered as an in product, if they have templates, if they have colors, if they have videos, learning videos, do you take an English person that has been doing a video in English and just putting subtitles under there? That is not successful. When we have taken the same content, given the outline to somebody in another country and said, please make your own training video in your style of training and how people learn in that country, the satisfaction just skyrockets. When we write blogs, you can't localize all blogs. How you market in one country does not translate necessarily, or using fonts that are Latin is not the same as Arabic. So we would then find local native people that are experts in a country and have them write on that content. So culturalizing is really saying, if somebody opened up an application and the UI was in their language, but it wasn't just the UI, everything as they used it, they felt like, oh my gosh, Adobe I would think this was something written for Japan, or I think this would be Russian. It's really taking that level of ownership of building something as locally relevant as possible.
Great, thanks, Priscilla. I understand that.
Very expensive, and so we have to prioritize.
We're running out of time. Any last thought? Anybody else? One last burning thought or takeaway? No, I think we're speechless.
Takeaway for me was that as a young person, it's always important to be humble and focus on the learnings, not necessarily going for the glory of the job, but just the learning. It's something that I'm reminded of often. And that's also what product management is about, in a sense.
Wise words.
Priscilla, something that I picked up from what you said, my name's Paul, I'm based out of India, and I have seen the Adobe product management and engineering team from close quarters. It's incredible how you run 200 plus products with this cultural sensitivity that has to go in. And what I really picked up is that this has to be really thought through from process point of view, because each time a new feature is even being conceived of, this has to really be embedded in the life cycle, without which you really can't go fix it later, right? So that's a big takeaway for me.
Yeah, I wish we were better at it, Paul, but we try it. We do our best.
Thanks, Paul. Well, we've got to conclude. So I just would like to a big thank you again to Priscilla for serving as our guest speaker and sharing this fascinating story. And it really brought together the whole Global Readiness series for us in a sense to look at, first of all, leadership, how to lead, then how to line the organization, how to educate and train, and then how to ensure execution readiness. So I want to thank all of you for joining us for this exchange, and a big thank you to my colleagues, Bryan Semkuley, Messina, to bring their wisdom to play, also their perspectives for the exchange on this session on accelerating execution readiness worldwide. So this is our last session, but we hope that we'll stay in contact and with us through into the new year. Wishing you a happy holiday season, but we look forward to accelerating readiness with you next year. And in the meantime, feel free to download our playbook on leading innovation in a changing world. We also have a global readiness scorecard, kind of a fun tool that you can play with over the holidays. But do keep in touch with us, and we'll look at ways that we can continue to collaborate and ensure that everybody's global launch ready.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.